Welcome to this YSL tutorial. In this video we're going to talk about working with PowerPoint in Excel VBA. So the video is all about how you can write code in an Excel VBA project which controls Microsoft PowerPoint. We'll start by showing you how to set a reference to the PowerPoint object library, which makes writing code talking to PowerPoint much easier. We'll then talk about how to create a new instance of PowerPoint, which essentially sets the application running on your computer. Once we have the application running, we can show you how to create presentations and then insert slides into that presentation. And then we can show you how to copy tables and charts from Excel into the PowerPoint slides. We'll also talk about how you can add and apply basic formatting to symbol text boxes and shapes on those slides. Before the latter half of the video, we'll talk about version control, which is all about making sure that the code you write on your computer will work regardless of who you give that code to run. So I'll talk to you about how you can test which version of PowerPoint is running, and how to make your code version independent by doing things like removing references to object libraries and specific keywords. So there's quite a lot to do, and it's quite a technical video, particularly towards the end. Let's get started. For the first example in this video, we're going to write a subroutine which creates a new PowerPoint presentation and then copies a table of data and a chart from Excel into new slides in that presentation. For this video I'm going to be using Excel 2013, but it doesn't really matter which version of Excel you have. We'll make sure that we write the code in such a way that it will work with whichever version of Excel and whichever version of PowerPoint you're using. So the first step is to head into the VB editor, and I've already created a module for myself called Using PowerPoint, where I'm going to write all my code. I'm going to begin a new subroutine here called Create New Presentation. Before we start writing code that gets Excel to talk to PowerPoint, we should make sure that Excel will understand what we mean when we start talking about PowerPoint objects. At the moment, Excel doesn't even know that PowerPoint exists, never mind what a presentation or what a slide is. So perhaps the most convenient way to make this work is to set a reference to PowerPoint's object library. And we can do that by going to the Tools menu and choosing References. Then we can scroll through the enormous long list of available references and find the one called Microsoft PowerPoint Object Library. I'm just going a little bit too far there. Back up a bit. There we go. So we've got the PowerPoint 15 object library in my case. The reason I've got the version number 15 here is because I'm working in Office 2013, and that's the internal version number for that version of Office. If you're in a different version of Office, you'll have a different number. 2010 has version number 14, 2007 is version number 12. We've no idea what happened to version number 13. I think the Office developers are a little bit superstitious. Going even further back, Office 2003 has internal version number 11. It doesn't really matter at this point what version number you have available. All you need to do at this stage is tick the box for the version you have, and then click OK. And now it makes it much easier for us to write code that talks to Microsoft PowerPoint. It's quickly worthwhile mentioning that that reference is saved along with your workbook. So when I save the Top Movies workbook that I'm working in now, that reference will be saved along with it. If I started a brand new blank Excel workbook, I'd need to go through that process again, should I want to get Excel to talk to PowerPoint. But for now, we're going to stick with this Top Movies workbook and start writing some code to create a new presentation. Our first job is to declare a variable which can hold a reference to the PowerPoint application. So I'm going to start by declaring a variable with a dim statement, and I'm going to call my variable PPApp, short for PowerPoint application, as, and the type of object or the class of object I want to store in here is an application. If I try to refer directly to the word application, can you see it appears twice in this list, along with quite a few other keywords as well. I've got two definitions for many classes of object. And that's because both the Excel object library and the PowerPoint object library both contain definitions of the same classes. Now I want to make sure that I definitely get a PowerPoint application when I declare this variable, and I can't do that simply by choosing one or the other one of these items from the list. It doesn't matter which one I choose here. This reference gets resolved when your code runs. So if I head to the Tools menu and choose References again, essentially what happens is that the VB editor works through this list of reference libraries, and it checks the first library that it encounters, which contains a reference or a definition of the application object. And in this case, it's always going to be Excel, because Excel appears above PowerPoint. Now, it is possible to change the priority order of your references, but it's not possible to move PowerPoint above Excel. So at this point, apparently, it seems that there's no way to create a variable which holds a reference to a PowerPoint application. The trick to doing this, if you can call it a trick, is not to refer just to the word application. qualify the name of the class with the name of the library which contains its definition. So if I press Ctrl and space after the keyword as, rather than referring directly to application, I can look for the PowerPoint library. You can see this lovely little icon in the IntelliSense, a little set of books there meant to look like a library. PowerPoint dot application. You'll see that application only appears once in this list because the PowerPoint library only contains one definition for that class. So that's how to declare a variable which holds a reference to a specific application. Now that we've declared the variable, we can use it to create a new instance of the PowerPoint application. And we can do that by saying set ppapp equals new PowerPoint.application. So that's the line of code that actually starts PowerPoint running on your computer. But strangely enough, you wouldn't actually physically see PowerPoint appear. It starts running as a hidden background task. So if you want to make PowerPoint visible, you have to change one of the properties of the application object. So we can say ppapp dot, then you get a list of all the methods and properties of a PowerPoint application. I want to change the visible property to be equal to, and then I could choose from one of the Microsoft Office constants that I'm provided with, MSO true in this case, or you could just use the more generic Boolean value true. It's entirely up to you. They both actually reference the same underlying value. It doesn't really matter here. I'd also like to make sure that PowerPoint becomes the active window as well. So I want to make sure the PowerPoint window appears in front of all of my other open windows. So I'm also going to say ppapp.activate to make sure it comes to the front of my screen. Having done all that, I'm just going to run the subroutine just so we can see when I do so. I end up with a new PowerPoint application. I don't get a presentation itself or any slides, but we'll solve that problem in a moment. But we've reached the stage where we've actually got control of Microsoft PowerPoint. Just before we start writing code to create presentations and slides, I want to talk about a couple of other ways you could have created a new instance of a PowerPoint application. So I'm going to make a quick copy of this subroutine and paste it in down below. I'm going to make it give it a new name. I'm going to call it Create New Presentation AutoInstancing. You may have seen us mention this technique in a couple of other previous videos. But the idea here is rather than declare a variable and then set it to be equal to a new instance of a class, what you can do is combine these two lines into one and create something called an AutoInstancing variable. So what I'm going to do is remove this line which sets PowerPoint to be, or the variable to be a new PowerPoint application, and just insert the new keyword into the declaration for that variable. So dim ppapp as new PowerPoint.application. Now, slightly misleadingly, this line doesn't actually start PowerPoint running on your computer. PowerPoint will start running the first time your code encounters the name of your variable. Essentially, every single time you encounter the name of this variable, the editor checks to see if it references an application yet. And if it doesn't, it will create a new instance of that application. So the end result will be exactly the same in the long run. If I select this subroutine and run it, we'll end up with a new instance of PowerPoint created. I'm just going to close that one down. It seems very convenient. It means you can avoid writing an entire line of code, doesn't it? There's a couple of small downsides to it. You may have seen us mention this again in previous videos. First of all, there's a small overhead checking whether or not that variable refers to an instance of an application yet. And that overhead doesn't just get encountered the first time the variable is referred to. It's encountered every single time you reference the ppapp variable in this entire subroutine. So it does add a small overhead to your code. The other small issue is that you can't ever write a test yourself like this. If I said if ppapp is nothing, then end if, and I don't know, I'll just do something very, very simple and maybe display a message box, PowerPoint not running. This test can never ever work with an auto-instancing variable, because as soon as you encounter the ppapp variable, the editor checks if it's nothing, and if it is nothing, it makes it equal to something. It creates a new instance of a PowerPoint application. So if I just run this subroutine from start to finish, I won't see my message appear. All that will happen is as soon as the VB editor encounters that variable, it creates a new instance of the application. So that's another small downside to auto-instancing variables. I tend not to use them myself in the real world, but you will see that used in many other people's code, so just so you're aware of what that actually does if you do see it used elsewhere. But I'm going to remove that subroutine just for the moment, and that was just a quick mention of how those work. There is one other way that you could create a new instance of a PowerPoint application as well, and this method avoids the use of the new keyword altogether. So I'm going to make another copy of this subroutine and paste it in down below. I'm going to change the name of this one to Create New Presentation with Create Object. So createObject is the name of a function in VBA, and you can use it to replace the new keyword. So if I take the new keyword away and use my IntelliSense list, Control and Space on the keyboard to find the createObject function, you'll see that createObject has a couple of parameters, but there's only one compulsory one. It's called class as string. So a class is a type of object, essentially, a definition of a type of object. So the class that I want to create here is a PowerPoint application. I've got to pass that in as a string, so all I need to do is wrap up the name of the class in a set of double quotes, close a parentheses, and that will also create a new instance of a PowerPoint application. So again, if I just run this code again from start to finish, we will see we end up with yet another instance of PowerPoint. Now, the reason you might want to consider using the createObject function rather than the new keyword is that createObject allows you to create a new instance of PowerPoint without having to have a reference set to the PowerPoint object library. And the reason that might be important is if you're sharing this code between people who have different versions of Microsoft Office installed. If you remember earlier on, I had to the Tools menu and chose References and set a reference to the Microsoft PowerPoint 15 object library. I'm also working in Excel 15 and Microsoft Office 15. This is version 2013. But what if you sent this to somebody who did not have Office 2013 installed? Let me see if I can quickly simulate that by opening up this Excel workbook in a different version of Excel. I'm just going to switch back to Excel and make sure I've saved this file. Then I'm going to close down Excel 2013 altogether, once it's finished saving. There we go. And I'm going to close it all down. Then I'm going to open up Excel 2010 from the Start menu. And when that's finally opened, I'm going to open up exactly that same file and head to the VB editor. Waiting for it. There we go. Right, so I can head to the File menu and I can choose to open up that file. Wherever it is, I stored it on my desktop. There's the file. Enable macros, head to the VB editor. I want to have a look in the Tools References list. What you should be able to see is that the version number of Excel and the version number of Office has changed. So any default reference that was set in Excel earlier on has changed to match the new version that I'm working in now. But that's not true for the reference that I set to Microsoft PowerPoint. That's still referencing version 15, which of course is Office 2013. Now that's going to be a problem for anybody who does not have Office 2013 installed on their computer. When they try to open up this file, if they look to the references list, they would see the word missing listed next to Microsoft PowerPoint. So the whole idea of using the createObject function is that it allows you to do something like this. If I just cancel out of the references dialog box for now, in fact, sorry, what I'm going to do is head to the Tools menu, choose References. I'm going to uncheck the reference to PowerPoint 15. Click OK. Now at this point, neither of these two subroutines will currently work because I don't now have a definition for what a PowerPoint application is anymore. So that one won't work, and nor will this one. However, with the createObject function, what I can do is replace the reference to PowerPoint.application with the more generic object. If I try to run this one now, this will run and successfully create a new instance of PowerPoint. It still opens up PowerPoint 2013 because that's the version that I have installed on this laptop, but on another user's machine, it will use whichever version of PowerPoint they have access to. So essentially, using createObject allows you to write version-independent code. These two techniques are called, and you may have seen us mention this in a previous video, early binding, which is when you set a reference to an object library and rely on that to write your code, and this is called, hopefully obviously, late binding. So it's when you don't set a reference to an object library, it's when your code works out which object library to use when the code actually runs. Late binding sounds really convenient, and it's very, very useful if you want to share code between people with different versions of Office. The big downside to using late binding is that you lose any access to the IntelliSense, because of course the IntelliSense list is dependent on the reference libraries you've set. What you tend to find in the real world is that you will write all of your code when you're developing using early binding, and then right at the end you'll switch it to a late binding technique just by replacing essentially two lines. You replace PowerPoint application with the word object, and you replace new PowerPoint application with the createObject function. There will probably be one or two small other tweaks you'll have to perform as well, but we'll mention those a little bit later on in the video. Just for now, I'm going to close down this version of Excel. I'm not going to bother saving any changes this time, and then I'll reopen Excel 2013 and head back to the same file I was just using. So having mentioned all the different ways to create a new PowerPoint application, let's get to the stage where we can create a new presentation in that application. I'm going to get rid of my late binding version of the subroutine at this point. We can always change that very easily later on. I just want to make sure that I've still got a reference set to the PowerPoint object library. I want to rely on that because I'm going to need to use the IntelliSense. We've got the application visible and active on screen. The next job is to create a new presentation. I can do that fairly simply with the, pp_app.presentations. So presentations is the collection of open files in PowerPoint, just like workbooks is the collection of open files in Excel. Presentations.add will simply create a new presentation. So if I run this code now, we should see that I end up with a new presentation. It doesn't have any slides in it, but again, we'll get to that stage in just a moment. Now, I'm going to close this down and just make one small addition to my code. Because I'm going to need to refer to this presentation several times later on in the code, I want to create a variable that stores a reference to the presentation that I create. So I'm going to have a new variable up here that I'm going to call dim pp_pres as a PowerPoint.presentation. And then instead of just adding a new presentation, I also want to store a reference to that presentation when I do so. So I'm going to say set pp_pres equals PowerPoint app.presentations.add. So if I run that subroutine again now, exactly the same thing will happen. We'll get a new presentation, but the advantage that I have now is that I have a reference to that presentation stored in my variable. Now the next job is to start adding slides to the presentation, and just like we did when we created a new presentation, we stored a reference to it in a variable. I'd like to do the same thing with the slides that we create. So I'm going to have a new variable at the top, dim pp_slide as a PowerPoint.slide. And then when I create a slide, I'm going to set a reference of the slide I create by saying set pp_slide equals. Now the method that I'm going to use to create a slide is involved with a PowerPoint presentation. So if I say pp_pres dot slides, slide references the collection of slides in the presentation. What I want to do then is apply a method to it to add a new slide. So if I look at the IntelliSense list, I can see there's a method there called add slide, and then if I open a set of parentheses after that, it shows me there's two parameters, index as long, that's the number of the slide I'm creating, so this would be the number 1 because it's the first slide I'm creating. Then if I type in a comma, it takes me to the parameter called custom layout. What this wants to refer to is a custom layout of the presentation I'm working in. The add slide method was actually added in PowerPoint 2007, and it allowed you to create new custom layouts for each slide. The problem with this is, well, there are two problems with this actually, two reasons I don't want to use the add slide method. First of all, custom layouts are really awkward to work with, and I don't have any custom layouts in my bog standard basic presentation that I've just added. So I'd have to actually create a custom layout first before I could add a slide using the add slide method. The other problem is that if I was working in PowerPoint 2003, the add slide method doesn't even exist, and I want to make sure that this code works for any version of PowerPoint. So I'm actually going to backspace the add slide method, and this is going to be one of the very rare occasions where I'm going to ignore the advice of the IntelliSense list. You can see that if I type in a full stop, I only have the add slide method. I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to just type in the word add and then press escape to clear the IntelliSense list. Then I'm going to open a set of round brackets, and it'll show me that there actually is still a hidden add method. Now this allows me to specify an index for the slide I'm creating. It's the number 1 again. Then if I type in a comma, this takes me to just the generic layout argument, and I get a list of all the existing standard layouts for slides in PowerPoint. So the one I'm going to use here is pp layout title. So that's the title slide layout, and that returns a reference to the slide that's being created. So if I close the parentheses there and hit enter, just give this one a quick run to see what the result is, we'll end up with a new presentation with a single slide in it, and it's got the title slide layout. Now that we've created this title slide, it would be useful to fill in the title and the subtitle, and we can do that by referencing the objects or the shapes that exist on the slide. So we've got two shapes on this slide. We don't know what their names are, but we can rely on the fact that they're indexed. So the first shape is the number 1 and the second shape is the number 2. So if I just close down this presentation and don't bother saving it, head back to the code, what I can do here is say pp_slide dot shapes open brackets, and that allows me to reference the index of the shape on the slide. So the first one will be number 1. Then I can say dot, and what I want to refer to is the text frame of that shape. And you can see that there are two instances of the word text frame. There's text frame and the inventively named text frame 2. Now, text frame 2 was again introduced in PowerPoint 2007, and it was designed for the new style of shapes, so something called a shape range. And again, because I want to make sure that this works in PowerPoint 2003 and earlier, I'm going to use the text frame property rather than the text frame 2. So if I say text frame dot, and then the text frame itself has something called a text range, what I can finally do then is set that to be equal to, what's this going to be? This is going to be a movie presentation. So that's going to be the title. I can do pretty much exactly the same thing to set the text of the second shape. If I say pp slide dot shapes, and of course this one will be the number 2, dot text frame dot text range equals, I'm going to put this in as by Wiseowl, and then run that subroutine one more time just to see the effect. And there we go, we've got a movie presentation by Wiseowl. Fantastic. The next thing I'd like to do is insert another new slide into the presentation, give it a blank layout, and then copy some data from Excel into that blank slide. So I'm going to close down this version of the presentation, and I won't bother saving the changes. And then I can head back to the VB editor here, and in fact what I can do here is copy the line that we wrote previously, because I just need to make a couple of simple tweaks to this to add a new slide. So set pp slide equals pppres.slides.add. This time the index number is going to be the number 2, because it's going to be the second slide. And I don't want it to have a title layout. What I want it to have this time is the pp layout blank. I also want to make sure that when I insert that slide, I also select it so that it becomes the active slide. So I'm going to say, once I've created it, I can say pp slide dot select. Having done that, just a quick little run to preview what that does. So we've got 2 slides in the presentation now, and this one has a blank layout, and this one's selected. So the next job is to copy data from Excel into that new slide. So again, I'm going to close down this copy of the presentation and not save the changes. And then just have a quick look at the range of data we're going to copy. It's going to be everything from sheet 1, from cell A1 down to E15. And the easiest way to select that range of data, and assuming that the list might be a different size each time I try to copy it, I'm going to refer to range A1's current region property. So back in the VB editor, I can say range A1.currentRegion.copy. And that's straightforward enough. Now all I need to do is paste it into the PowerPoint presentation with the slide that I've got selected. So to do that, I can say pp slide dot. Now ideally what I'd like to say here is just paste, but unfortunately you can't do that directly in PowerPoint. In order to paste something into PowerPoint, you have to paste it in as a new shape object. So what I can do is say pp slide dot shapes dot paste. And what that will do is paste the data that I've copied, but also generate a new shape object at the same time. So I'm just going to use the generic paste method to begin with and just show you what the result of that is. If I run the subroutine now, we'll see we end up with a new slide, and we've got a basic PowerPoint table created. Because I copied Excel data, a range of Excel cells, it automatically creates a basic PowerPoint table. Now there are other ways that you can do this as well. You don't have to create a PowerPoint table. You can use, I don't know if you noticed there was a paste special method. So if I close this version of the presentation down and say don't save, I could also have said shapes dot paste special, and the paste special method has a range of different options I can select from. If I type in a space, it's got a parameter called data type, so I can choose from a range of different pictures like JPEGs and bitmaps and so on, and I can also choose to paste as an OLE object, object linking and embedding. So if I do this for a range of Excel cells, that will paste an embedded Excel table. So if I run that subroutine again, we'll end up with a very similar looking output, except that this time if I select the object, you can see I haven't got the table tools, I've got the drawing tools tabs in the ribbon. And if I were to double click on this object, that will, as long as I choose to enable macros, because I'm actually opening up the same file that macros are enabled in, you can see that it's clearly an embedded Excel worksheet. So those are a couple of different ways of pasting in data. What I'm going to do here is close down this version of the presentation and don't save it, and head back to the VB editor again. I'm going to revert back to the generic paste method for now, because I'm quite happy with the fact that, that it's a basic PowerPoint table. I don't want a linked or embedded object. Now that we've got a copy of the object in the slide, it's very likely we'll want to modify its size and its position, because as we saw when we ran that subroutine, we get a very, very small table stuck right in the middle of the slide. Actually, the position of the object is different depending on which version of PowerPoint you're running this code in. If I close down PowerPoint 2013, which is the default version on my machine, I'm just going to quickly open up PowerPoint 2003 to force my code to use PowerPoint 2003 when it runs. So if I run this one again now, we'll see it's pasted into PowerPoint 2003, but rather than being in the center of the slide, it's up in the top left-hand corner. Regardless of that, what we want to be able to do is make sure that it's positioned in the correct place on the slide. So we want to increase its size, of course, so it fills the full width of the screen, and perhaps also center it on the slide vertically. So what we will do is close down that presentation and don't bother saving the changes, and we'll start manipulating the object that we've just added to the slide. Let's start by trying to change the width of the shape that I've added to the slide. That's fairly straightforward to do. In order to make that work, I need to reference the shape object. So I can do that by saying ppslide.shapes. So that references the collection of shapes on the slide. I need to then refer to the index of the shape I'm trying to modify, and I can pretty much work out that this is going to be the number 1 because I created a blank slide to begin with, and I've only pasted a single object onto it, so it must have index number 1. Then I can close the brackets and refer to the width property. Now the width is just the width in points of the shape, and it's set to as a number. So I guess the simplest thing I do is just guess what number I needed to set the width of the shape. Let's say 600, for example. And then if I run that subroutine, and I'll find out how wide the shape becomes. Still not quite wide enough if you ask me. So I could go back and modify the code again and increase the number maybe up to, say, I don't know, 1,000, maybe 1,200. But it gets very tedious guessing again and again and again. Ideally what I'd like to do is set this shape to be the width of the slide that the shape belongs to, and that would be a much more reliable way of doing it. So let's close down this version of the presentation, and instead of setting this to be an exact number, I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to say set the width equal to ppres dot page setup dot slide width. So that reads whatever the width of the slide is in this presentation, and that means that if I ever modify the page setup of the presentation, that will still set the shape to be the correct width. So having done that, let me run the subroutine again, and we should see this time the object becomes the width of the slide. You can just about make that out. Obviously there's another problem here with this version of PowerPoint in the fact that the shape is in the middle of the slide, but we'll solve the positioning in just a second. Just to show you that it works in PowerPoint 2003 as well, which will have a different default slide width, if I close this copy down, open up PowerPoint 2003, go back to the code and run it one more time, we'll see that it sets it to be the exact width of the slide, which you can see is clearly narrower than it is in 2013. Okay, so we've solved the width property. The height is fairly similar if you wanted to change the height, but I think I'm reasonably happy with the height of the object. I'm going to leave it set to the height that it is. What I want to do now is change the position of the object. So for PowerPoint 2013, I need to make sure that the object comes across to the left-hand edge of the slide, and I also want to make sure that for every version of PowerPoint, it gets centered vertically on the page. So let's deal with the position to the left-hand edge of the slide first of all. Close down this presentation, don't bother saving the changes, and then we can modify the left-hand position of the shape. Doing this is again fairly straightforward. What I need to do is reference the shape object again, so I'm just going to quickly cheat and copy and paste that part. So ppslide.shapes1 dot left. So the left property again is the distance in points from the left-hand edge of the slide to the left-hand edge of the shape. And I know that if I want it to be exactly on the left-hand edge of the slide, I can just set that to be equal to 0. So having done that, if I run the subroutine again, this will work in PowerPoint 2013. You see the object is now aligned to the left-hand edge of the slide, and if I just quickly show it in PowerPoint 2003 as well, it won't have any effect in PowerPoint 2003 because the object was already on the left-hand edge of the slide, but just to show you that it doesn't affect this version in an adverse way. So that sets the position horizontally. Let's now deal with how to set it vertically. I want this object to be centered in the slide vertically. One way to do this is to use the align method of a shape range object in PowerPoint. This relies on the fact that we've got a shape selected first before we try to do this. I don't know if you noticed when we were doing this in PowerPoint 2003, the shape when it's pasted onto the page, onto the slide, doesn't actually get selected, although that does happen in later versions. So just to make sure that this will always work in whichever version we're using, I'm going to add the select method to the end of the paste, so paste.select. I could also have said down here ppslide.shapes1.select, that would also have worked. And having done that, what I can do is say pp_app.activeWindow.selection, refers to whatever's selected in the active window, of course, .shapeRange.align. So there's the method that we're going to use. Now there are two parameters of the align method, and the first one is saying what things we're trying to align together, and we're trying to align the middles of our shape. So I'm going to say MSO align middles, and then the second parameter there is relative to. What this is asking for is, are you trying to align the shapes relative to the slide? So I want to say, yes, I am trying to do that. So I'm going to say MSO true. Okay, having done all of that, what I can do is now, so you can see the entire line there, what I can do now is run the subroutine, and this will work in 2013 first. And you see it gets aligned to the middle of the slide. Close that down in 2013, and then open up 2003, and run it again in PowerPoint 2003. And it works in PowerPoint 2003 as well. So that's one fairly convenient way to center objects on a slide. Use the align method of a shape range object. So using the align method is one way to set the position of an object centered on a slide. But it's not the only way. We could also have done this by just basically setting the top property, just like we set the left property earlier on. Just that we'd have to be a little bit clever about how we do that. So if we can just explain what the methodology would involve. If we wanted to set this shape to be exactly in the center of the slide vertically, what we would need to do is work out the height of the slide. Let's say it was 100, for example, and then divide that by 2, and that will give us 50, so that gives us the center point vertically of the slide. What we then need to do is work out half the height of the shape. So we can take the height of the shape, let's say it was 10, divide that by 2, that will give us 5. And then if I subtract that value from half the height of the slide, so if I subtract 5 from 50, that gives me the value 45. And I would set the top property of the shape to be equal to the result of that formula. So that again would set it to be in the center vertically of the slide. And that sounds like quite a lot of effort, but sometimes it can be nicer than trying to remember the syntax of the align method, because it's quite reliant on the fact that we have the active window, and we have the shape selected, and understand there's a shape range and so on. So just to show you quickly one alternative method, I'm going to get rid of the align method there, and I'm going to say ppslide.shapes1.top equals. And again, this can be set to be a number, so I could just set it to be a specific number, like 23, for example. But what we're going to do is work out the actual position we want our shape to be in. So I'm going to go on to the next line here. I'm going to use the continuation character, space underscore, and on the next line, I'm first of all going to work out half the height of my slide. And I can do that by using a similar technique to finding the slide width. I can use the page setup property of the PowerPoint presentation object. So I can paste that in, and then say dot slide height, and then simply divide that by 2 to work out half the height of the slide. Then I need to subtract from that half the height of the shape. So again, I'm going to subtract, and then open another set of brackets. If I want to find the height of my shape, I can refer to that object first, and then say dot height, and then simply divide that by 2 as well. Can't quite fit it onto one single screen width. If I close round brackets there and hit enter, I'll drag the screen across so you can actually see the whole thing. So this will do exactly the same thing, essentially, as aligning the shape to the center. If I give this one a quick run, just so we can see, the shape effectively ends up in exactly the same position. The next thing I'd like to do is add a title to the slide, and to do that I'll need to add a new shape, a text box, and then set the various properties of that text box. To make life as easy as possible, we're going to set a reference to the shape that we add in a variable. So I'm going to say dim pp textbox as PowerPoint.shape. So a text box is an example of a generic shape object. And then when we head down to the bottom of the subroutine, we can say set pp textbox equals ppslide.shapes.add textbox. Now there are various parameters of the add text box method. If I open a set of parentheses here, you can see there are 5 different parameters I have to provide. None of them are optional. So I'm going to do this on a separate line. I'm going to type in a space and an underscore so I can go down to the next line and carry on typing where I am. The first parameter is the orientation, so this sets the orientation of the text. If I press Control and Space, I can see the list of constants I'm allowed to use here. The first thing I'm going to do is set the text orientation to horizontal. Then the next thing I need to do, if I type in a comma, is set the left property of the text box. I'm going to set that to be equal to 0, so I want it to be aligned at the left-hand edge of the slide. Then I have to set the top property. I'm going to set that to be 20, so it'll be 20 points down from the top of the slide. Then the width of the text box I would like to be equal to the entire width of the slide, so I can cheat here and copy and paste this slide width property from the page setup of the presentation. Paste that back in. Then finally I've got to set the height of the text box. I'm going to set that to be an exact height of 60. So if I close the parentheses there and hit enter, that will create my new text box. And I'm just going to give this one a quick run to see what we end up with. Because when we first do this, it will look as though nothing has happened, but that text box actually is there. We don't see it because there's nothing in it, and it's blank. It's got a transparent background colour and no border, but it clearly is there. So now we can start setting the various properties of that text box to make it show the slide title. So I'm going to close down this copy of the presentation and again not save the changes. What I'm going to do now is add a width statement to my subroutine. So after I've set a reference to the shape that's been added, I'm going to say width pp textbox dot text frame. Everything I'm going to do here is within the text frame of that shape. Give myself a couple of blank lines and type in end width, and then I can start filling in the various properties of that text frame. The first thing I'll do is set what text is contained within it. I don't know if you remember from earlier on, we set the text of the existing text boxes by using textFrame.textRange. I actually cheated a little bit there by relying on the default property of the TextRange class. Technically what I should have said was textRange.text. I just got a little bit lazy, as I tend to do when I'm writing code. So I'm going to add in the textRange.text property. That does exactly the same thing. It just means that we're not relying on the default property. So that's more technically correct. Not every programming language has a default property, so it's best to get into good habits early on when you're programming. So what I can do now is, in my with statement, say .textRange.text, and I'm going to make this say equal to something like list of current films. Okay, then I can set various other properties of the text box. Let's set the alignment of the paragraphs. I've got .textRange dot paragraph format dot alignment equals. I can say pp align center. I could also set some font properties as well. I could say .textRange dot font dot size equals. Let's see, I'm going to go for 26 or so. That will probably do. I could also set the font name that's being used, so .textRange.font.name. I can make that equal to, oh, I don't know, let's say Calibri. I could also set the vertical alignment of the text as well. That's quite important. So I'm going to say .vertical anchor equals MSO anchor middle, so that it's vertically aligned in the center of the text box. And there's various other things that I could do here as well. I could change the font color, I could change the font bold and italic properties, and so on and so on. Just like in the video on Microsoft Word, I don't know if you saw that one, but formatting isn't particularly difficult. It's just long-winded and tedious. It's just identifying every single property you need to change and successfully changing them. So, having done those few basic things, I'm just going to give this one a quick test to make sure that it works. And there it is in PowerPoint 2013, all good. And then I can close that one down, just quickly check it in 2003 as well to make sure that everything works. One more quick run, and there it is in PowerPoint 2003 as well. Okay, so that's, I think, one slide successfully created. And the next thing we will do is create a new slide which copies a chart from Excel into the PowerPoint slide. Based on what we did earlier, it should be relatively easy to work out how to set up a new slide where we can copy and paste a chart. So in fact, let's just cheat, let's copy and paste. So these are the two lines that made sure we insert a new slide and select it. So I'm going to copy those two lines first of all and paste them in. Then I know that I need to create a new index number, so this is going to be index number 3. I want it to have a blank layout again. I would like that slide to be selected. The next thing we did when we copied the data from Excel was to refer to the region of data we were copying and then apply that method. And similarly, we can do that with a chart. So I've got a chart1 object in my workbook. There it is, called chart1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say chart1 dot chart area dot copy. Now that I've done that, I can reference the slide that I've just created and paste it in. So again, I can reference my pp slide variable. So I can say pp slide dot shapes dot paste, and I want to make sure that gets selected as well, just in case I need to modify it in a moment. So let's say dot paste dot select. So, having done all that, let's have a quick look at what the result is to work out whether we need to modify its size and position. So I'll run it first of all in PowerPoint 2013. And there we go, there's the chart, looks pretty good, centered on the page, selected. That looks pretty good to me actually. I don't think I'd modify anything about that one in 2013 at all. Let's close it down in 2013 and check what it looks like in a previous version. Let's open up PowerPoint 2003 and let's run it again. And there's the table, and not quite so successful. I think what I'll do with this one is make sure that the chart gets centered on the slide. So I'm going to make sure that I'll do this using the align method this time rather than working out the actual half of the width and half of the height of the slide. Let's do it in a slightly quicker and easier way. So I'm going to close down that version of PowerPoint, don't bother saving the changes, and then I'll write the line of code that will center that on the slide. So if you remember from earlier on, I could do this by referring to my PowerPoint application variable, PPApp, and then referring to the active window property of that, and then referring to the selection property of the active window, and the shape range property of the selection, and finally there I can apply the align method. There are two parameters to fill in. The first one is what I'm trying to align. I'm going to go for the middles first, so this will align the object vertically in the slide. I want to make sure that it is relative to the slide as well, so I need to say MSO true. Okay, now that I've done that, I also want to make sure it gets aligned horizontally. So the easiest way to do that is to just copy and paste that line, and then replace MSO align middles with MSO align centers. Okay, so having done all that, let me just give it a quick test to make sure it all looks sensible. It should not adversely affect PowerPoint 2013. That still looks good. If I close that down and then open up PowerPoint 2003, let's make sure it still looks sensible there as well. So if I run the code again, okay, so our chart is clearly centered on the slide, but it's exposed another small problem with the chart. Can you see it's ever so slightly too wide for the slide object that it's been pasted into? What we're going to do now is add a little bit of code that changes the width of this object if it is wider than the slide that it sits on. So I don't want this to affect the 2013 version where the slide is already wide enough. I only want it to affect when the chart is too wide for the slide. So let's close down this version of PowerPoint, don't bother saving the changes, and we need to add an if statement to our code to check if the chart is wider than the slide. Now if I try to resize the chart after it's been aligned, it might mean that after I've resized it, it's no longer aligned properly. So I'm going to make sure that I resize the object first before I try to align it. I'm going to add my if statement above the align methods. Now just as before, when we added an object to a blank slide, we know that it has an index number of 1, so it's the first object on the slide. So I can say if ppslide.shapes1.width is greater than ppPres.pageSetup.slideWidth, then give myself a couple of blank lines and type in end if. What I want to do now is set the width to be equal to the width of the slide. So I can just copy and paste this line and then change the greater than symbol to an equals symbol, so that will change the width of that shape to be equal to the width of that slide. So one more quick test, and again just to make sure that it doesn't affect PowerPoint 2013, I'll run it in that first. And the chart just looks exactly as it did earlier, so I can close that down and don't bother saving the changes. And one more test in 2003, back to the VBA editor and run it one more time. So there we go, now you can see hopefully that the chart is exactly the width of the slide, whereas previously it just slightly overlapped the edges. So close that one down and don't bother saving the changes. I think we've got all the slides that we want in our presentation. There's just a couple more things I'd like to do. Probably the worst thing about the presentations we've created so far is that they look quite bland. There's no formatting whatsoever. So the easiest way to apply formatting to a presentation is to apply a template or a theme. So what we're going to do, after we've added a new presentation to the presentations collection, we're going to say ppPres.apply, and then we have a choice of three things: apply template 2, or apply theme. We're going to go with apply template for now because this is the one that will work in any version of PowerPoint. Apply template 2 was added in Office 2013 and Apply Theme was added in Office 2007. So if we use Apply Template, we can guarantee that that will work in any version of PowerPoint that the user might be running. The next thing we have to do is specify the file name and folder path of the template that we want to apply. And this is going to cause another small problem for us as well, because different versions of Office have their templates installed in different locations. Just to give you a quick idea of where these might be, if I go to the Office 2003 installation folder, so on my machine that's in C Program Files Office 2003, that folder path might be different as well. That was a specific folder path that I set up when I first installed Office on this machine. Ordinarily this would just be called Microsoft Office, so that's something else we have to consider in a moment. But in this folder we've got a folder called Templates, and if I look into there, and then look in the Presentation Designs folder in there, we've got a list of all the available PowerPoint templates, and I'm actually going to use one of these in a moment. If I just quickly show you how this looks in a different version of Office, if I go to Office 2007, this is the installation folder for that version of Office, I've got a folder in here called Document Themes 12, and that lists out the theme files. So rather than template files, these are just themes which contain the background colours and font formatting and so on. So if I wanted to find the actual presentation templates, I'd have to go back to Office 2007, choose Templates, and then choose the very obviously labelled 1033 folder, and in there I'll find out all my PowerPoint templates. So this is the same thing for Office 2010. Same thing, I've got document themes for themes, and I've got templates and 1033 for the actual presentation templates, and so on and so on. Same for 2013 as well. Themes and templates stored separately. So what I need to do for now is just assume that I am going to use a bog standard Office 2003 template. So I'm just going to assume these are available wherever we happen to be. I'm going to apply the shimmer template. That sounds quite nice. So I'm going to copy this folder path first of all from Windows Explorer, and then I'm going to add on the shimmer.pot file name by hand. So back to the VB editor. I'm going to apply a template. I'm going to put this into a set of double quotes and then paste in the file path that I've just copied. Then another backslash, and the name of the template that I want to add is shimmer.pot. Okay, so having done that, I can run the subroutine and see hopefully that it works in PowerPoint 2013. It does. It's not particularly pretty, but at least it works. And then I can also do the same thing just to check that it will still work in PowerPoint 2003 as well. If I head back and choose PowerPoint 2003, then go back to my code and run it one more time, we'll see that the same template gets applied in 2003 as well. So that's the basics of how applying templates works. I guess what we would want to do to make this as robust as possible is check which version of Office was being used so that we could apply the correct kind of file or template or theme, and also make sure that we generate the correct folder path. Now, in order to make this work properly, there's two main bits of information I need to know. First of all, which version of PowerPoint is running, and second of all, what the path of that version of Office is. And I can actually get both of those bits of information once I've created a new instance of PowerPoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start stepping through this subroutine, and I'm going to get to the point where I create a new instance of PowerPoint, and I'm going to make it visible, just so I can close it down again easily later on. So to begin with, that starts running PowerPoint 2013 on my machine. What I can do while PowerPoint is running is use the immediate window to query a couple of properties of that application. If I view the immediate window from the view menu and then question ppapp.version, that tells me that it's version number 15. If I query ppapp.path, that will tell me the install path of that version of Office. If I just stop this subroutine from running at this point, and then I'm going to close down that version of PowerPoint and I'm going to open up manually PowerPoint 2003, then I'm going to go back to the VB editor and I'm going to start stepping through this one again. So there we go, I've got a new instance of PowerPoint and it's visible. If I go back to the immediate window at this point and hit enter, that tells me it's version number 11. Then I go for the path, hit enter, that tells me the path of Office 2003. So if I know what those bits of information are, or at least I can retrieve them, it shouldn't be too difficult to construct the file and folder path of the template folder based on the properties that we get. So let's have a go at doing that. I'm going to stop stepping through this subroutine and see if we can work out how to build the correct folder path to the templates folder. Just to make life a little bit easier, we're going to assume that any version of PowerPoint from 2003 or earlier uses this sort of relative path. So it's the installation folder for Office, Templates, Presentation Designs. And for anything later than that, we're going to assume that it uses the relative path similar to that for 2007. So it will be the installation version of Office or the installation folder for Office, and then document themes followed by whatever number it happens to be. Okay, so having established those assumptions, let's head back to the VB editor and start writing some code. So I'm going to remove the immediate window just for the moment to give myself a bit more space, and let's give myself a couple of blank lines here. Let's start with an if statement that checks what the version of PowerPoint is. So if I say if ppapp.version, now technically the version property returns a string, so what I could say is if ppapp.version equals 11.0, exactly as we saw in the immediate window before, then I'm going to add my end if at this point because I know I'm going to forget otherwise. The problem with that is that we'd have to explicitly test for every single version of Office. I guess we could use a case statement and make every single Office version a complete specific file and folder path, but I want to make life a little bit easier on ourselves, so we're going to cheat here. We're going to test if the version of Office is less than or equal to, not the string 11.0, but the number 11. Because VBA uses implicit data type conversion, it will happily treat the version property as a number if we try to compare it against another number, so that will solve that small problem. Right, now that we've established we're working with Office 2003 or earlier, we can construct the correct folder path. So to make this work, I've got to convert the string returned by the path property of the application, so this path here, into the path that I showed you earlier on here. So C program files, Office 2003, templates, presentation designs. So I've got to somehow eliminate the Office 11 folder from that path and tag on instead templates, presentation designs. So I'm going to use a couple of text functions to do that. What I'm going to do is say, in fact I'm going to create a variable first that's going to hold the path of my templates folder. So let's say dim template path as string, and in here we're going to say template path equals, I'm going to use the left function here. So the left function you might have seen used in a couple of other videos before. It's one of the text functions in VBA. It gives you a number of characters to the left of a string of text. The string I'm interested in is ppapp.path, and the number of characters that I want to get, which is the second parameter, is up to the last backslash character in the path. So basically I want to return all the characters to the left of this point here. So I need to find out what position this last backslash occupies in the path. Now I can do that using a function called inString or instr rev. Just trips off the tongue that name, doesn't it? inString reverse. So it searches for one string of text inside another string of text and returns the character position of the found string. So I'm going to say inString rev. The string that I'm checking is ppapp.path, and the string that I'm looking for, or trying to match, is a backslash. So if I close a couple of sets of round brackets there, that will generate, if I just quickly step through this subroutine, in fact I'm going to make sure that I open up Office 2011 or PowerPoint 2003 first. If I start stepping through this, we should be able to see that when this if statement works, the version is 11, so that's less than or equal to 11, so that will generate a path. If I step through, program files, Office 2003. So we've successfully eliminated the Office 11 part that we wanted to get rid of. The next step is to just concatenate onto the end of that the templates, presentation designs path. So I can do that very simply by just adding an ampersand to the end of this line. I'm going to use a space underscore here to continue typing on the next line, just so I don't go off the edge of the screen. And then in a couple of pair of double quotes, I'm going to copy and paste this part here and drop that into the string. So the full result will be the correct folder path for templates in Office 2003. Calculating the path for versions of Office later than 2003 is a little bit more complicated. First of all, we've also got to get rid of the folder path for Office 15. So just to go back to the VB editor and show you the immediate window again. So for 2013, it includes the Office 15 folder, so we have to strip that folder off just as we did for the Office 11 folder. What we also have to do is make sure that we incorporate the version number of Office in the next folder. So the Document Themes 15 folder is for Office 2013, but it's the Document Themes 14 for 2010 and Document Themes 12 for 2007. So we need to make sure we incorporate that somehow as well. So back to the VB editor, I'm going to add an else clause to my if statement. So I'm going to say else, and then I'm going to say template path equals, and again I'm going to use this same function here to generate the first part. So I'm going to say template path equals left ppapp.path in string reverse ppapp.path backslash. Then another ampersand and an underscore to carry on typing on the next line. And now I've got to put in document themes, making sure there's a space after the word themes as well, that's quite important. And then I'm going to join on the two leftmost digits of, sorry, wrong window, I went to view the immediate window there. I need to bring in the two leftmost digits from the version. So I'm going to assume that every version number has 2 digits in it. That's the important part that I need. So what I can do is say ampersand left open parentheses ppapp.version, comma 2, and finally add on another backslash right at the end. So that will generate the correct folder path now for that version of Office, anything from 2007, 2010 or 2013, and hopefully for later versions as well. Another thing that we have to consider here is that different template files in different versions have different file name extensions. So in PowerPoint 2003 and earlier, we're using proper template files, PowerPoint templates with their .pot extension. For the later versions, we're actually using theme files which have a .thmx extension. So we need to incorporate that into our variation as well. Let's add another variable to the code. Let's have a template extension, or in fact template ext for short, as a string. And then in our if statements, we can simply say things like template ext equals .pot if the version number is 11 or earlier. And then for versions later than that, we can say template ext equals .thmx. Okay. Now there's just one last thing that we've got to consider. And that's because although we've considered the different paths and the different file name extensions, what we haven't considered yet is the fact that in different versions of Office, we have completely different names for all of the templates. So the list in 2003 is completely different to that in 2007. There's a slight bit of consistency between 2007 and 2010. There are similar names. There's Apex and Concourse, for example, which exist in 2010 as well. But there's lots and lots of extra unique ones there as well. The list for 2013 is completely different. Again, it's a much shorter list. So what we've got to do is make sure we can always use a consistent name. Now, let's think. There are two ways we could approach this, I suppose. What we could do is create templates with exactly the same name for all the different versions of Office. But that doesn't guarantee that another user running the code will have that consistency. Another choice would be to write a case or an if statement that checks which version of Office we're using and make sure that we select a named template that will definitely work. So I think we're going to go with the second choice. Although it's a little bit more effort, it makes sure that the code is that bit more robust and reusable and transferable. So I'm afraid we're going to have to write another section of code that will generate the template name. Let's declare another variable that we can use to hold the name of the template. So I'm going to add another one to this line, template name as a string. And then I'm going to use a case statement to select the correct version of PowerPoint. So after my if statement, I'm going to say select case ppapp.version. And then a couple of lines further down, I'm going to have end select so that I don't forget to do that later. And inside that case statement, I can start testing for which version I'm using. So I can test, for example, case. I suppose I could say case is less than or equal to 11, and that would work happily, and that would deal with versions prior to version 2003 as well. Or I could test for a specific version of PowerPoint as well. I think in this case, no pun intended, in this case we want to make sure that we're testing for a specific version, because as we've seen, the different versions have different theme names. So I'm going to go this time for case 11.0, so they're testing the exact value of that version property, and if that's true, I'm going to say template name equals, and let's pick Shimmer, which is the one we were using earlier on to demonstrate this in the first place. So there we go, there's the version for 2003. Let's have another case then and say case 12.0, comma 14.0. So we'll actually put version 2007 and 2010 together, and if that's true, we'll say template name equals. I need to make sure I pick one that exists in both. We saw that Apex was one theme that's consistent between 2007 and 2010. And finally, we'll have case 15.0, and we'll say template name. I'm going for the shortest name of all. I'm going to go for the one called Ion. So we've hopefully successfully generated all the correct parts of a complete template. What we can then do is put them all together in this line here, which is trying to apply the template. So let's remove that line which refers to that specific path, and then simply concatenate template path, ampersand template name, ampersand template extension, and that should generate the correct path. Now, even having gone to so much effort to deal with different versions of PowerPoint that might be running, there is still the potential that this might go wrong when we try to apply a template. Perhaps the template names have been changed or not installed in the first place, or even installed in completely different locations altogether. So what we're going to do is, just to make sure that the code will continue to run even if the template can't be applied, we're going to add a bit of very basic error handling. Just before we try to apply the template, we're going to write this statement: on error, resume next. So basically what that line means is, after that point in the subroutine, if any runtime errors occur, ignore them and carry on with the next line of code instead. It's one of the most basic forms of error handling you can write. If you're interested in a bit more detail, we have created a complete video on error handling in VBA, so I'm not going to go into too much more detail here. The only other thing I am going to do is, once I've made sure that that line has either worked or been ignored if it causes a problem, I want to make sure that the error handler gets switched back off again. So to do that, I'm going to say on error, go to 0, and that'll make sure that the system reverts to normal error handling. So I'm going to save that code as it stands, and I'm going to give it a quick test. So let's do it first in PowerPoint 2013, so I'm not going to change or open up any other versions. I'm just going to run this subroutine, and hopefully what we'll end up with is a beautifully formatted presentation with, I guess this is the Ion theme. What I can then do is close that version down, and I'm not going to bother saving the changes. I'll then go and open up PowerPoint 2003, and I'll just close down that presentation. I don't need that one, and go back to the code and run that in PowerPoint 2003. And there we go, there's the shimmer theme applied. Lovely as it is. I can close that down and not save the changes. I guess I should test it in PowerPoint 2007 or 10 as well. If I test it in 2010, there is one other small problem that we're going to encounter here. Let me just close down that default presentation. I've genuinely just discovered this. If I try to run this subroutine at this point, we will get to the point where we have a partially complete presentation. It's created the first slide and set the correct titles, it's applied the theme obviously and inserted a new blank slide, but things have paused, things have stopped. If I head back to the VB editor, you can see here that we've got a runtime error. This is not associated with the template. If I hit the debug button, it's actually associated with trying to paste the object onto the PowerPoint 2010 slide. Now, I hadn't realised this, and apologies if you've been following the rest of this video up to this point in 2010 cursing my name because it doesn't actually work. But as it turns out, if I just reset the subroutine, the basic paste method doesn't appear to work in PowerPoint 2010. I haven't discovered the reason why yet. What I can do is replace that line by saying ppslide.shapes.pasteSpecial and paste it as an OLE object. I did mention this briefly earlier on, the fact that you can do this, and it appears that to paste an Excel spreadsheet into PowerPoint 2010, this is actually required. I'm going to look up the reasons for that later on just to satisfy my own curiosity, but just for now, I'm going to make sure that I've got PowerPoint 2010 open again. And just to prove that it does actually still work, and the fact that our themes work properly, if I run this one more time now, there we go, everything working as it should with this fairly horrible theme as it turns out. I think I might change my mind about that one. But the important thing is that the theme stuff actually works. So we've got quite a comprehensive subroutine there that creates an admittedly quite simple presentation. There's a couple more things we're going to do just before the end of the video. Most importantly, what we're going to do is save the presentation and then close down PowerPoint altogether. Saving a presentation is pretty straightforward. It's kind of similar to saving a workbook in Excel. So if I refer to my ppres variable, which references my presentation object, I can say .saveas, and then all I have to do is provide a file name for the presentation to be saved as. So I want to save this on my desktop, so I'm going to reference my environ function. Again, you'll have seen me use this in several previous videos, I hope. So I'm going to refer to user profile, and then ampersand, /desktop /moviepres dot, and then here's another small problem. If I'm in PowerPoint 2003 or earlier, it's going to be PPT. If I'm in PowerPoint 2007 or later, it's PPTX. So once again, we're going to have to do a little bit of version control. Let me just leave that in there at the moment as PPTX. And what we're going to do is declare another variable. I'm going to switch up to the top of the subroutine and say dim file ext as string. Try again, string. And then back down at the bottom of the subroutine, I'm going to write a little if statement that checks again which version we're using. So I'm going to say if pp app.version. In fact, why am I doing this here? What I should do instead is just incorporate that as part of my previous if statement. Why not? I need to do this anyway, so I'm going to head back up to this if statement and add on one more thing. I'm going to say file ext equals .ppt if I'm in version 11 or earlier, and then again file ext equals .pptx. Okay, this is just to avoid having to write out the if statement again down at the bottom of my subroutine, so I just realised that I could use that existing if statement just to save a bit of time and effort. So, if I've got that created successfully, I can now remove that extension from the save as parameter and then simply tag onto the end with a concatenate symbol and ampersand file ext. So that should successfully save the presentation. What I'd also like to do is close that presentation down and then quit from PowerPoint altogether. So closing the presentation is fairly straightforward. I can say pppres dot close, nice and straightforward. And then to quit from PowerPoint, I can say ppapp.quit. Just as a bit of good practice then, once I've finished with the PowerPoint application variable, because I created a new instance of it earlier on, it's good practice to release or terminate or destroy that variable later. So if I say set ppapp equals nothing, then that will release that variable. So that's not absolutely 100% necessary in VBA, because when nsub happens, this will occur anyway. But it's always good practice to release your variables as soon as you finish using them, so that's what I'm going to do there. Okay, I guess at this point there's no real reason for making PowerPoint visible when we actually run the code. So I guess if you were going to release this and release it to the wild and let other people use it, you would probably end up either commenting out or removing these two lines. But I'm going to leave it in here just for now. All I'm going to do now is give it one final test. I'm just going to test this in version 2013 to begin with. So I can run that subroutine and you'll see 2013 opens up and creates the presentation and saves it and closes it down and it's gone. Oh no, it's killed PowerPoint. I don't think this is a problem with my code. I genuinely think this is a problem with having multiple versions of Office installed on the same computer. Windows just does not like having so many different versions of Office. I've got 4 different versions of Office installed. What I should see, if I have a quick look at the desktop folder, I'm just going to open up Windows Explorer and head to my desktop. I should see that I have got a copy of that presentation saved. I genuinely don't know what the crash was there to do with PowerPoint. I'm going to do one more quick test then as well. I'm going to open up PowerPoint 2003 just to simulate having that version installed on my machine. And if I go back to my VB editor, run that subroutine one more time, we should see PowerPoint 2003 happening in the background. And that hopefully successfully closes down without crashing. It looks pretty good to me. So if I have a look back at my desktop now, I can see I've got my PPT file there saved as well. So there we go, we've got a pretty robust subroutine at this point that handles multiple different versions of PowerPoint, creates a reasonably nicely formatted presentation, and gets some data from Excel into it. There's one more thing we're going to do in this video, I think, just to make sure that this will finally work on any version of Office when we give it to other people to use. Now, even with all the effort we've gone to make this code as version independent as possible, there is still one thing that could cause this to not work on somebody else's machine. And it's something we mentioned very early on in the video, if you can remember that far back. When we went to the Tools menu and References, we set a reference to a very specific object library. And of course, if I give this to somebody without Office 2013, this is not going to work. So I would want to make sure that I uncheck the reference to that library before I release my code. Now, if I do that, that's going to cause all sorts of problems with the code that I've written so far. So I'm not going to do that just at this point. What I'm going to do first is change any reference to a PowerPoint class to a more generic object. So where it says PowerPoint application, I'm going to call that object. PowerPoint presentation, that will also become an object. PowerPoint slide will become an object. With shape, I can probably get away with not calling it a PowerPoint.shape, just calling it a shape. The way Microsoft Office works, the shape object is fairly generic. It works across all the applications in Microsoft Office, so it works in PowerPoint and Excel and Word and so on. So I can probably get away with just using a generic shape class here, but just for consistency's sake, I'm going to convert it back to an object. I also have to make sure that I change the way I create the new instance of PowerPoint. If you remember earlier on, we changed the word new to the call to the function create object, and that allows us to pass in the class of object we're creating as a string. So essentially Excel doesn't have to understand the definition of that word because it's just passed in as a string of text. Now, one other place where this can go wrong, and it's not immediately obvious where this can go wrong actually, but is wherever we've used any reference to something called a constant. And here's an example of a constant, PP layout title. This is something that was built into the PowerPoint language. It's a definition. Really what this references, this keyword is a word in code. It actually references a number behind the scenes. Now you can see those numbers in a couple of different ways. You can use the object browser to view it. So if I head to the View menu and choose Object Browser, I could look in the PowerPoint library and look for something called PP Layout Title. If I scroll down far enough in this list of constants, there we go, PP Layout Title. If I select that item in the list, you can see that it's a constant and has a value of 1. Now that's one way to see it. Another way to see it is to start stepping through your subroutine. If I press F8 to begin stepping through, if I hover over any constant in my list. So if I hover over the word PP layout title, that tells me it's the number 1. And if I hover over PP layout blank, that tells me it's the number 12. So I'm going to have to exchange these for the corresponding values, which makes the code much less readable, obviously, but it's important in order to make this work. So that was the number 12, so let me exchange that for 12. There's another thing I've got here, paste special, where I said PP paste OLE object. That's a constant as well, so if I hover over that, that tells me that's the number 10, so I can replace that with the number 10. And I think that I've probably got them all at that point, but it's very easy to miss them. Now there's another one, look, PP align center. So if I hover over that, that's got to be the number 2. You will see any ones that you've missed when you try to run the code. There's another one, PP layout blank. I know that's got to be the number 12 again. It's a very tedious process, but that looks like I should have got them all. The MSO constants should be fine because they're part of the Microsoft Office library, so that should be fine to leave those as they are. Right, let's scroll back up to the top. I'm going to reset this subroutine, and then I'm going to go to the Tools menu, choose References, and I'm finally going to uncheck the box for the PowerPoint library. So if I click OK now, I'm going to give the code a quick save, and then I'm going to attempt to run it again, just to make sure that it still works. So if I hit the Run button, I don't get any compile errors, and it looks like things are working in the background. It's probably going to crash PowerPoint again. Yeah, it does. This is a consistent problem with just having multiple versions of Office installed, so that's not a problem with my code. I promise, it's not a problem with my code. So there we go. That's how you can convert this, what was previously an early binding technique, into, if you remember, it was called a late binding technique. So now you can safely give this file to somebody else, and they don't have to worry about which version of Office they've got installed, because we haven't set a reference to a specific object library. Just to show you what would have happened if we'd missed any of those little constants that I was changing to their underlying numerical values, let's have a look at where we were adding our first slide to the presentation. So here, where it previously said the number 1, I had PP layout title. If I try to run the subroutine now without a reference to that PowerPoint object library, what will happen is you'll get a compile error telling you that it does not recognize what that item is. So that's how you will always be able to spot if you've actually missed one of your constants. If I replace that back with the number 1, that will again now work. One other quick thought about this particular subroutine is where we're saving our files. Because we're using the same file name each time, we're essentially replacing the existing version of the file. So sometimes it's nice to create unique file names by incorporating some kind of unique piece of information, usually the date and time. So you might have seen this in the Word video that we created in the previous video in this series, but just to reiterate that if you haven't seen that video, it'd be nice to incorporate a formatted version of the date and time into our file name to make it unique. So if I display the immediate window just to show you what functions we're going to use to do that, let me just clear out what we had in earlier on. You may have seen the now function used previously, and that calculates the date and time while your code is running. Now, ideally I'd like to just be able to incorporate that into the file name, but I can't because the / and the colon are both illegal characters in a file name. So what I can do instead is use a formatted version of now. I can say format, open brackets, now, followed by a comma, and then create a custom date format by doing things like this. If I use 4 Ys, that will give me the year, then perhaps have a dash and a couple of M's for the month, then another dash and a couple of D's for the day, then a space and a couple of H's for the hour, a dash and a couple of M's for the minutes, and another dash and a couple of S's for the seconds. That, if I close the double quotes and close round brackets, will create a valid string that can be incorporated into my file name. You don't actually need to have the dashes there either, by the way. You might just prefer to have the numerical designation of the date and time and without the space in between as well. This will work perfectly happily. So you generate just a unique number. I think this makes it slightly more readable, however, with the space, with the dashes and the space, but it's entirely up to you. So all we would need to do in order to make that work would be to modify this line here. So I'm going to say movie pres, and I'm going to have a space there as well. Then I'm going to have an ampersand and a space underscore to continue on the next line. Oh, I'm still stepping through the subroutine I forgot. I'm just going to click OK because I was still stepping through the routine at that point. So another ampersand, a space underscore, and on the next line I'm going to incorporate this function, format now, with that particular format. And then all I need to do is concatenate on the file name extension as previously. So that will generate unique file names, which means our files won't consistently get overwritten. I'm going to open up PowerPoint 2003 this time, just to avoid seeing the crashes each time when we run this. So there's PowerPoint 2003, and just to show you the desktop folder again, just so you can see that I've got 2 files in there, movie pres, pptx, and ppt. If I go back to my code and run this one again now, and there's a presentation created in PowerPoint 2003, and that will have a unique designation with the date and time. It looks a bit messy, but at least it's unique. And again, if we run that one again, it will create yet another unique file name. So I'm going to run it in 2013 this time. There it goes, and it's going to crash again almost certainly when I close it down. No, it didn't this time. Interesting. Horrendously inconsistent. Oh well. If I look at the desktop, I've got another version of that file now with a date and time code incorporated. So hopefully that demonstrates the ways that you can get Excel VBA to talk to Microsoft PowerPoint, creating presentations, saving them, closing them down, and hopefully you found it useful. If you've enjoyed this training video, you can find many more online training resources at www.wisl.co.uk.